America, the land of opportunity, the land of the free. These are the phrases we cling to, the ideals we hold dear. Yet beneath the gleaming facade of prosperity lies a stark and unsettling reality. A crisis festers in our streets, a silent epidemic that shames the very fabric of our nation. This is the story of America's hidden struggle, the growing crisis of homelessness. We see them on our streets, the forgotten souls huddled beneath bridges, seeking refuge in doorways. Their faces, etched with hardship and despair, reflect a system that has failed them. They are the veterans who fought for our freedoms, now forgotten and discarded. They are the families torn apart by economic hardship, forced to seek shelter wherever they can. This isn't a problem confined to the shadows. It's a national disgrace, a stain on the American dream. It's time we stopped averting our gaze and confronted this crisis head-on. We can no longer afford to ignore the plight of our fellow citizens. Their struggle is our struggle, and their silence demands our attention. It's time to talk about homelessness in America. It's time to listen to the stories etched on the faces we pass by. It's time to demand better, to fight for a nation that truly lives up to its ideals of compassion and justice for all. The numbers paint a bleak picture, a stark testament to the growing crisis of homelessness in America. Over 500,000 people experience homelessness on any given night in this country. That's more than the population of entire cities, and the numbers are rising. Since the 2008 recession, the number of homeless families has increased dramatically. Veterans who have sacrificed so much for our country are disproportionately represented among the homeless population. And the crisis is particularly acute among young people, with thousands of unaccompanied youth facing the harsh realities of life on the streets. These aren't just statistics, they are human beings. Each number represents a life derailed, a dream deferred. Behind each data point lies a story of hardship, of struggle, of a system that has failed to provide a safety net for its most vulnerable citizens. We can't ignore the human cost of this crisis. The emotional toll on individuals, families, and communities is immeasurable. The economic burden on our healthcare system, law enforcement, and social services is staggering. We all pay the price for inaction. The path to homelessness is rarely straightforward. It's a complex web of interconnected factors, a perfect storm of misfortune that can strike anyone, anywhere. One of the most significant drivers of homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. Soaring rents and stagnant wages have made it increasingly difficult for low-income families to keep a roof over their heads. The shortage of affordable housing is a national crisis, affecting both urban and rural communities. Another major factor is unemployment. Job losses, particularly in industries hard hit by automation and globalization, have pushed many families into homelessness. The lack of stable employment opportunities, coupled with low wages and inadequate social safety nets, creates a precarious existence for millions of Americans. Mental illness and addiction also play a significant role in homelessness. Untreated mental health issues and substance abuse disorders can make it incredibly challenging for individuals to maintain employment, relationships, and stable housing. The lack of accessible and affordable mental health and addiction treatment services exacerbates this problem. Behind the statistics, behind the numbers are real people with real stories. Stories of loss, of resilience, of the human spirit's indomitable will to survive. Take, for instance, Sarah, a single mother who lost her job as a waitress during the pandemic. Unable to afford rent, she and her 2 young children were evicted from their apartment. They now live in their car, moving from parking lot to parking lot, desperately trying to stay invisible. Or consider John, a veteran who served 2 tours in Iraq. He returned home suffering from PTSD and chronic pain, unable to hold down a steady job. He ended up on the streets, haunted by his experiences, his sacrifices forgotten. These stories are not isolated incidents. They are a heartbreaking chorus echoing across our nation. Each story is a reminder of the human cost of homelessness, the shattered dreams, the broken promises, the lives forever altered by this crisis. We must not, turn away from these stories. They are a call to action, a plea for empathy, a demand for justice. It's time we listened. Section 5. Concrete jungles, cities struggling with homelessness. While homelessness affects every corner of America, certain cities bear a disproportionate burden of this crisis. Los Angeles, with its sprawling tent cities and a homeless population exceeding 60,000, has become the epicenter of this national tragedy. San Francisco, once known for its progressive ideals, now grapples with a surge in homelessness fueled by a tech boom that has priced out longtime residents. The streets of Seattle, Portland, and New York City tell similar stories of despair, of communities struggling to cope with the sheer scale of human suffering. These cities are not alone. From coast to coast, communities large and small are grappling with the complex challenges of homelessness. The lack of affordable housing, coupled with inadequate mental health and addiction treatment services, has created a perfect storm, pushing more and more people onto the streets. The human toll of this crisis is evident in the faces of those living on the streets, in the despair that pervades these communities. It's a stark reminder of the urgent need for comprehensive solutions that address the root causes of homelessness. Section 6. The Stigma of Invisibility. Societal Perceptions and Misconceptions. Homelessness is often shrouded in stigma, a veil of misunderstanding that prevents us from seeing the human beings behind the labels. Stereotypes abound. They're lazy, they're drug addicts, they're choosing to live this way. These harmful narratives dehumanize and marginalize an already vulnerable population. The reality is far more nuanced. Many experiencing homelessness are working poor, struggling to make ends meet in an economy that no longer works for them. Others are veterans, grappling with the invisible wounds of war. Some are fleeing domestic violence, seeking refuge from unimaginable trauma. The stigma surrounding homelessness creates a dangerous barrier to seeking help. It reinforces feelings of shame, guilt, and worthlessness, making it even harder for individuals to escape the cycle of poverty and despair. We must challenge these harmful stereotypes and acknowledge the humanity of those experiencing homelessness. They are our neighbors, our friends, our family members. They deserve our compassion, our understanding, and most importantly, our support. Section 7. Policy Failures and Broken Promises. Where did we go wrong? The current state of homelessness in America is not a result of individual failings, but a reflection of systemic failures. Years of misguided policies, inadequate funding, and a lack of political will have created a perfect storm, pushing more and more people into homelessness. The gutting of social safety nets, the defunding of mental health and addiction treatment programs, and the prioritization of corporate interests over the needs of the most vulnerable have all contributed to this crisis. We've turned our backs on those who need us most, leaving them to fend for themselves on the streets. The criminalization of homelessness, with cities passing ordinances that target and penalize those living on the streets, is not only inhumane, but counterproductive. Instead of addressing the root causes of homelessness, these policies further marginalize and punish those already struggling. We need to demand better from our elected officials. We need to hold them accountable for their broken promises and demand policies that prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable. We need to invest in affordable housing, expand access to mental health and addiction treatment, and create a safety net that catches those at risk of falling through the cracks. Section 8. A Call for Compassion, Bridging the Gap Between Us and Them. The crisis of homelessness is not insurmountable. It's a problem we created, and it's a problem we can solve, but it requires a fundamental shift in our perspective, a recognition that this is not their problem, but our problem. We must move beyond the stereotypes and see the human beings behind the statistics. We must listen to their stories, understand their struggles, and recognize their inherent dignity. We must treat them with the same compassion and respect we would afford any other member of our community. Small acts of kindness can have a profound impact. Offering a warm meal, a kind word, or a listening ear can make a world of difference in the life of someone experiencing homelessness. Volunteering at local shelters, donating to organizations working on the front lines, and advocating for policy changes are all tangible ways to make a difference. It's time to bridge the gap between us and them. It's time to build a society that values compassion over indifference, a society that recognizes the inherent worth of every human being. Section 9. Time to Act. Rebuilding Lives, Rebuilding America. The time for talk is over. The time for action is now. We can no longer afford to ignore the crisis of homelessness that is tearing at the very fabric of our nation. We must demand better from our elected officials, from our communities, and from ourselves. Investing in affordable housing is not a handout. It's an investment in the future of our communities. Expanding access to mental health and addiction treatment is not a luxury, it's a moral imperative. Creating a social safety net that catches those at risk of falling through the cracks is not socialism, It's basic human decency. This is not just about rebuilding lives, it's about rebuilding America. It's about reclaiming the ideals of compassion, justice, and opportunity for all. It's about creating a nation where everyone has a chance to thrive, regardless of their circumstances. The path forward is clear. Let's choose compassion over indifference. Let's choose action over apathy. Let's choose to build a better future together.